We are back. Welcome to another episode of the Brothers-in-Law
Yes,
podcast.
yes,
This is
welcome back.
episode 11.
Okay.
We have put some episodes in, and it's excited to be here. I consider it a milestone. We are in double digits now.
Wow.
Very excited for this episode. We have a special guest. We'll get to her introduction in a few. But yeah, for those who are, first of all, let me say I am your humble host, Imani, your brother-in-law. I got my
Conrad, I'm Conrad.
my
the
brother-in-law
other
Conrad
brother-in-law.
too. And yeah, for those who are tuning in for the very first time, a little bit about Brothers-in-Law podcast is what we do here is we just want to make access to legal information more accessible and digestible to your average person. We know these things can be very complex and very convoluted, and it shouldn't have to be. And for those of us who've been doing this work for now going on 7 years, we don't want to gatekeep this information. And we know how much powerful it could be for people to know their rights and know their powers, as people. So that's what we do here. So each episode, we hope that we can introduce just a new idea, a new legal concept that people can go and just be a bit more informed about. And we hope that this episode is just the same. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna let Conrad introduce our special guest, and I may chime in because I'm very excited. I'm very, very, very excited.
Oh boy, this is a tall task. Do you know who we have here?
Special.
He won the only
Yes.
Wow.
Urooj Khan.
Wow.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. Thank
Urooj
you. Happy to be here.
is one of my dear friends.
Yes.
Very inspirational person. We all, me, Imani, and Urooj all started together at the place we work at.
Mm-hmm.
And Urooj started in the criminal defense practice with us. And, from what I know of Urooj is she's a fellow radical like me. We come at things from a very similar mindset.
Right.
We view the world in a very similar way. And, that just brought our connection together. But Urooj is so much more than that. I'm gonna let Imani kick off the rest of Urooj's bio.
Oh gosh, I'm not gonna read the promo bio, but yes, public defender, 6 years. Before being a public defender, you was an English teacher.
I used to teach high school English.
High school
Yeah,
English
before
teacher.
law school.
Many lives,
Yes,
Urooj,
many
many lives.
Yep.
She also has her own ceramics nonprofit.
Yes, we're gonna put in a quick plug for Public Ceramics.
Yes.
So-
Go ahead.
So outside of my lawyer life, I think we all have kind of the things that we use to blow off steam. So mine is that I make ceramics. I have a pottery studio that I work out of. And we have a ceramics nonprofit called
Right.
Public Ceramics. And we fundraise to give access to marginalized folks to classes, to be able to go to ceramic studios, make things, use art as a way to kind of work through stuff going on in their lives. So yeah, every year we have a application process. Even if you've never touched clay before, you can apply. And then we have a cohort in the summer, usually about 20 people. And they have classes. We go to studio tours, we go to museums, and we just
Right.
kind of build community together.
I love
So
that.
yeah, check us
amazing.
out online on
So
Public
amazing.
Ceramics.
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, yes. Yeah. And you can see public defenders are not a monolith. Okay?
That's right.
And honestly, I feel like the best public defenders are the ones who do more public work outside of their job. And then Urooj is just a perfect example of that.
Well, so are you guys. I think this is an amazing example of not letting your work just define you and finding
Thank
other
you.
ways to do things.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
I want to highlight how much I appreciate you as a person, as a friend as well. I was talking to somebody about this the other day about our job and what we do, and I was like, the first thing that's most important to me with this work is our clients, but the second has been my colleagues.
Yeah,
And like I said, it's a very, very close
it's a
second.
fact.
Yeah.
And there's no way I would have been able to stay at this job for this long without the colleagues that I work with, particularly without my hiring class.
Yep.
And Urooj, you are part of that core.
Thank you.
Love you dearly. In terms of introductions, we are also we supervise together.
That's right.
The two of us are in charge of supervising first-year lawyers, and we've been doing that for 2 years together now.
Yep.
So from being staff attorneys to being supervisors to being friends to unionizing, we'll get there. We've been through it.
Yeah,
Urooj?
absolutely. No, you guys are absolutely my comrades. I don't say that with any, like that is just we have been in it
Right.
for from the start. I
Yeah.
think whether it's fighting it out in court, whether it is working through stuff happening inside our office.
Yeah.
You guys are the people I look to as my moral compass.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I forgot we were in a reading group together too.
Oh.
Oh
Yeah,
my
that's how
Yeah,
God.
say more about that.
that's how we spent the pandemic. That's how we were, the courts were shut down. We weren't at work. We were going crazy at home. And Conrad and I and a couple of other our friends in the office, we were like, let's read some Marx
Let's read some
together.
Marx. Nerds.
So yeah, we had the syllabus that we were following. It was called it was the Revolutionary Summer School,
Yeah, the
organized by the People's
Revolutionary Summer
Forum.
Wow.
And they had a syllabus, and we would get together once a week and read through some really difficult texts and try to work out what it meant for us. And I really think that actually shaped me in a lot of ways. I think a lot of my understanding about labor and politics and thinking of myself as a leftist comes from some of that reading that we did.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I commend you. I remember we were roommates when this was happening, and I
Mhm.
did not have the discipline to join a reading group. I wanted to just have fun and play
Yeah.
and not work and not do any kind of thoughtful work.
Yeah.
And I'll go past Conrad's room, and he's in this Zoom meeting, in this actual book club. I'm like, yo, this is inspiring just to see my friends actually
He's
come
being
in here.
nice. They're making fun of me.
Look, we all had our coping mechanisms.
We did.
And
We
that
did.
was ours.
That was a healthy one.
That was a
I went through a range of unhealthy ones and healthy ones, and the pandemic did a number on a lot of us.
Who didn't go through an
Right.
bender during it?
we were in it.
But yeah, Roos, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, I'm excited to be here.
So yeah, we have a number of things we wanted to discuss, but one thing we always ask every guest or every lawyer who comes here, every public defender, is what brought you to public defense? What was your journey getting here?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I mentioned before, I used to teach high school English. And a lot of when I think about our job now feels so much more similar to being a high school teacher than it does to anything legal work that I've done. I think like being a public defender day in and day out, you are in front of a group of people who you are trying to communicate with, and all kinds of things comes up in that, especially when you're thinking about high school kids who are going through lots of different things at home and things with their friends.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of emotional presence from you. As your teachers, you have to be able to sit with somebody and kind of, that you're trying to teach this particular book or not, whatever's going on in your English lesson.
Yeah.
But you also know that the person in front of you is a real person who has things happening at their home, things happening with their friends. And you're trying to kind of work with them on that. And that's kind of what's happening with us with our clients too every day, that
Right.
they're coming in because they have this legal case, but that's not the entirety of their life.
Right.
It's actually a very tiny part for some of them, for their lives.
Yeah.
And so being able to manage all of that there's a lot of emotional and relational work that we're doing. So that was, I was a teacher, and then I was in law school. I sold out for a couple of years. Have to be real about that. I worked at a corporate law firm.
Okay. It's okay.
Paid off some of my loans, saved some money.
100%.
But I always wanted to come back.
Yeah.
I never thought I would stay in the corporate world. I think the question for me was what kind of work I wanted to do next.
Okay.
Because in the law world, you have what's called civil litigation, and then you have criminal litigation. And civil things is when you hear about civil rights lawsuits, when you hear about the ACLU, the NAACP, they're suing the police, or they're trying to change some government policy. That work is, you're not really with people. You're writing briefs, you're doing research,
Right.
you're going to judges, but you're not really in it in the day-to-day of people coming up to you and saying, I need help. Can you do this for me?
Right.
And so I wasn't really, I didn't really have exposure to that was sort of more my world, was the civil side.
Yeah.
And then I started to do more sort of direct services work. So working with people in housing court, working with folks who are in prison. And that was really where I felt like this is at the intersection of the things that I feel like I'm good at, and the things that I feel like are aligned with my values.
Yeah.
I think being able to meet people where they're at, say okay, what is happening for you today? What can I do for you today?
Yeah.
That feels much more meaningful and enriching than, being on a computer and doing research all day. And that's part of our job too.
Yeah.
But it's not the bulk of it. It's not the heart of it.
Yeah.
And so then I came to our office, and I've been there since, and started with the two of these guys on our training team. And now we supervise the training team.
Yes.
So it's been a pretty amazing journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question. So, I hear that part of what brought you to public defense is wanting to help someone out on the daily, wanting to help someone out with their daily problems when
Yeah.
they come to you. How do you deal with, because as public defenders, a lot of times we're hamstrung
Yeah.
by the system. Like
Right.
we
Right.
can only work within the tools that we're given.
Yeah.
So like, how do you deal with, not being able to really help your clients with everything they're asking you to help with?
Yeah, no, I think that's very real. And I think this is sort of something that we've been talking about what it means to be a movement lawyer versus what it means to be kind of, working with a particular client and the extent of what you can bring to your job and then also who you are outside of your work.
Mhm.
So I think that what a very quick thing that happens to most public defenders in their first year is this process of disillusionment, right? Like you come in with all these ideals and you think I'm going to get in the way and I'm going to like slow this down. I'm going to tell this judge what's what and then something will happen. And then you do all those things and nothing happens,
Right. Okay.
nothing happens. And so you realize that your wins are not that some judge is going to get your client released. Your wins aren't that you're going to win this motion that you absolutely should win, that there are
Right.
all these other forces that are getting in the way.
Yeah.
And so then it's for me redefining like, what is a win?
Yeah.
And sometimes a win is that my client comes down and sits with me and talks to me about something. And I just, for 5 minutes, they have my entire attention.
And you're the first person who's giving them that kind of attention.
Exactly. And I'm like, I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to get them to do anything. I'm not trying to get anything from them.
Right.
All I want to do is for 5 minutes say, what happened? And that was awful.
Yeah.
And it was wrong.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have happened.
Right.
And I think that if you're someone in it who's here for like the drama and the glory and all of that, like you will be disappointed in your work. I think a lot of times like people who burn out fast is like they're feeding that's what drives them is
Yeah.
those wins. And if that, if that's what you're just not going to get that.
Right.
I think the people who thrive in this work are the people for whom that moment of connection where like today I met a person
Right.
and I just sat with them and I just felt where they were and I helped them, spent this half an hour this morning with them and helped them navigate this like really fucked up situation as best as I could.
Right.
It's harm reduction
Right.
sometimes. And you have to be okay with that.
Right.
Because otherwise you will burn out, you will become bitter, you will become resentful.
Right.
And this won't be the job for you.
That's a good point. 'Cause I used to think that like sometimes people who get into this work who don't last long just didn't know what they're getting themselves into. But like there's no way to really know. I
You
think
can't
this
know.
is that work. You
Yeah.
can intern. I don't care how many places you intern at. I don't care how many lawyers you shadowed or you followed. You're not gonna know what this work is like until you're here.
That's right.
So there's no amount of preparation, no amount of law school that can really prepare you to be a public defender. So those who last long are the ones who find value in those
Exactly.
moments. And
Yep.
and I think that's real.
I had last week we had put a client or a week or two ago into the grand jury.
Like, can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me back
Okay.
that up
A lot of
little
words.
bit.
Right.
So when you get arrested for a felony, so that's a crime that would be more than a year in prison.
Mhm.
So very serious cases. Within 5 or 6 days, the DA's office has to present some evidence to a group of the community jurors, so
Mhm.
about 30 or 40 people,
Mhm.
to say, is there even enough evidence for this case to keep going, to
Mhm.
move forward, right? Because if there isn't, then the case gets dismissed. If the grand jury says, like, you know what, we saw what you have, we don't think this is enough,
Right.
this case needs to be dismissed, then
Right.
that's it. You're released from jail. The case is over.
Right.
And if the grand jury says, look, we think that there's enough evidence for the case to go forward, it's the standard is reasonable cause,
Mhm.
then the case moves on. So that grand jury is a really big pivotal moment in someone's case, because
Right.
if you go and the grand jury decides there's nothing to see here,
Right.
then you're fine. Your case is over.
Right.
So we've had clients who will sometimes testify in the grand jury, who will come and say, like, look, this is what happened or this didn't happen.
Mhm.
And what I've been surprised by after those moments is, what I'm focused on is like, okay, are we going to win or not? Is the grand jury going to vote for us, or are they going to vote against us?
Right.
And what I've actually have been surprised by is how much, for people who have gone in and testified, how even just that experience
Mhm.
of speaking their version of the story, regardless of how the grand jury responds, like
Yeah.
just that experience of, I got to sit in a room
Right.
with 30 or 40 people and just say what happened to me.
Right. Right.
It's actually really powerful. And, I've had clients go in and afterwards they've asked me, how do you think I did? And I've said, oh, I thought you were great. And even if we didn't get the result we wanted, just
Right.
hearing those words
Yeah.
has been such a healing moment for them.
Right.
And so it's helped me just think about like what we're doing in court is a very it's important, but it's not the totality of what's really happening here. There's a
Not at
lot
all.
that's happening
Not
Yeah.
at all.
emotionally for people, for everyone in that room.
Yeah.
And I think that, the richness of our job is like being attuned to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think you will get a lot from your life and from your work if you're
Mhm.
more attuned to that than like whether like what's happening in the win and loss column and whether some judge who's probably, doesn't care about our clients,
Yeah.
what they think about us.
That's real.
That's
Yeah.
real, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a real salient point about centering our clients and giving
Yeah.
them a chance to speak. Because our clients here routinely don't speak, let your lawyer speak for you. And like
Exactly.
it's their lives. They're the ones who's at risk of all the consequences of what will happen if they get convicted. But they're just told left and right from judges, from police,
Mhm.
be quiet, let your lawyer speak. And often from
us too.
lawyers,
Yeah.
don't speak. I'll speak
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
So like they just have this feeling of being powerless so much throughout the process, to where there is so much value in giving them that space to just speak and be heard and be okay with whatever the outcome is.
Look, I think our job is about like there's this article that I had read in law school. It's called I'm blanking on the name. I'll
Mhm.
think of it later. But it starts with this line. It's by Robert Cover, and it starts with this line where it's law exists in the field of pain and death.
Mm,
And that has always really stuck
profound.
with me
Yeah.
because everything that we do in our jobs, everything that we do in a courtroom, everything we do in our offices is about stripping the work from the pain and death that's happening around it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you wear these suits,
Yeah.
you walk into this courtroom, you go through the the security screening, you like speak in these very convoluted jargon.
Right.
But what you're actually talking about, the heart of it is how people hurt each other.
Mhm.
And we are constantly, as a way to cope, we try to deny that part of it. And when you, in some degree, you have to.
Mhm.
But like, what do we spend all day? We spend all day watching people bleed out on
Right. Oof.
cameras, and we watch
Yep.
people like knives and guns, and like, that is the heart of our work.
Yeah.
And the more I think that lawyers, which is something that lawyers do, is they really repress that part of it. We're not
Yeah.
really comfortable with that part of it.
Right.
Mm.
And so like, oh, here's this brief that's very technical and very like full of all this legal jargon,
Right.
Yeah.
but we're not really actually paying attention to the fact that what we're doing here is we're talking about a person who hurt somebody else,
Yeah.
or a person who was hurt by someone else. Like that is what we're doing. And so I think the more we deny that, the more we really deny the fullness and like
Yeah.
richness of what we're doing.
Yeah. And I think like, the law itself tries to beat the creative and emotional part of
Yes.
it out of us. It's
Yeah.
like
Mm.
you
Yes.
put down this very formulaic sentence
Mhm.
and this very formulaic standard, and you give me an answer based on this standard. You put in facts, you get out the
Yep.
answer. And I think like your your point about like centering our client and centering emotions is so salient, because like a lot of like what I see from like us who sit here, why we are like different in some respects than other attorneys, is because we actually, instead of just inputting that very formulaic answer, we're like, no, here's all the emotions behind it. I'm going to show you what actually, like, this is what happened to my client step by step by step.
Yeah.
And this is why the outcome shouldn't just follow this very formulaic standard.
Right.
And, I really appreciate that about us.
I think about like when we see this with our like first year attorneys
Yeah.
and how they have so much like heart and so much like every small thing that happens to their client, like they take so personally and like feel like, and it's hard. I think you have to like, you have to figure out the right balance.
Mhm.
But then on the other extreme is that you've seen the attorneys who've like been here for like a decade, and you're like, do you
Right.
even like your job? Like, do you even like, why are you still
Right.
here when you speak about the work or the clients
Yeah.
this way? Because, and I think, it's a defense mechanism in some ways, because like part of how they've coped with like the awfulness of what we're dealing with is
Right.
by shutting that
Right.
part of themselves
Yeah.
down.
Mm.
And I get it. Like that is also a coping mechanism.
Right.
But I think for me, like when we're thinking about like how do we stay rooted to who we are outside of what these courtrooms force us to be,
Mhm.
it's like I have to like the day I stop being connected to that version of myself, then
Time to go.
that's the day. Then it's time to
Yeah, and
then it's time to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Hopefully, I wish more lawyers had that realization and understanding. Okay, it's time to go.
But I do think that that's kind of like the shift that we're seeing in some of like the culture of public defense. Like I
Mhm.
think the culture used to be like, oh, you just kind of have to like grind it out and like
Yeah.
put up with whatever and
Right.
like terrible caseloads. Like you just have to deal with it. You just suck it up.
Right.
And like you can suck it up, but then
Right.
that turns you into like a version of yourself that I would never want to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I think it's all part of like how do we stay connected to who we were
Right.
before we became lawyers?
Yeah.
Who do you feel like you were before you became a lawyer?
Yeah.
Oh, you asking me that
Yeah,
question?
I'm asking that question.
Wait a second here.
What an existential question. Who
Yeah.
was I before I became a lawyer? I mean, I was a poet. I was someone who didn't like what was going on around me. I was someone who just would watch all the police, killings of people who look like me. I'm thinking about who I was like in college.
Yeah.
I was just soaking in the world around me and reacting to it. And I was someone who just like when I saw the little guy or I saw just people being oppressed and being unjustly treated, I just had a reaction to it.
Yeah.
And whether that reaction was going out and marching or that reaction was in college having a forum discussion debate about it, I had to react to it in a certain way. And I think public defense just became the way that my reaction manifested.
Exactly.
But the core of that was just having a visceral reaction to the harms that I was seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Conrad, who were you?
That's a tough question.
Guys thought this was
Who
gonna be
are you?
easy.
Right.
Have a Rouge on the show. Let her talk.
Oh man, I feel like like I don't know. Before I answer the question, it's just like a lot of times when I talk to Urooj, like it's like a lot of therapizing myself,
Yes.
and I always come out of every conversation with like I feel like a better understanding of myself and the world too. I'm like, damn, Urooj really made me think about X,
that's
Y,
really
Z.
sweet. Thank you for saying
You're
that.
the best. You're the best.
But man, so I've been like a little radical lefty since I was young. And so like I feel like who I was before public defense was I definitely have always had like a deep, profound caring of people outside of myself and wanting to make the world better for people. But I think I came at it when I was younger from a more paternalistic mindset, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I know what's right and wrong for people. Like, I know the answer. I know what'll fix everything. And so I guess like I came into public defense like before I actually started thinking like I know the best answer. I'm gonna tell my clients the best answer. Like I can see what's like moral and just for my clients in the situation, and like that's really changed for me doing this work because like now a lot of what I let my client drive a lot of what is the right answer for them.
Yeah.
Like what's best for your life.
Yeah.
You tell me. I'm gonna tell you the pros and cons or what could be the outcome in this situation, but you're the best person to really understand what the impact of this choice or this choice is going to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're willing to live with this outcome because this is what's important to you and you want to pursue this route, I'm rocking with you. Let's do it. Whereas before I probably would have been like, nah, don't do that because that's not going to be good for you because it's only going to lead to this.
Yeah.
And, so I feel like, that's who I was coming into public defense and like, now I'm not coming out of it, but now on the other side of it, it's
shaped you.
Yeah, it's a lot less paternalistic.
I think that, that's kind of like what I feel like is really important for us to stay connected to is because part of when you become a lawyer and you enter this profession, even the process of professionalization, right? It's like a gatekeeping tool because now they own us in some ways. You put your name in the book when you get sworn into the bar.
Right.
And now the New York State Bar Association gets to tell you like who you are and what you can and can't do. And I think that we are really like I obviously, I've taken an oath to the Constitution and to the New York State Bar Association, and I have a license, and then there's these set of professional ethics that I'm now bound to because I have this license.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, like I think it's really important to say that like that is not my highest commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Like the New York State Bar Association isn't the highest ethical, moral authority in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think for that is a question that everyone needs to come to an understanding to of like what are the moral authorities in my life that are beyond what the New York State Bar Association would want me to do.
Yeah.
So when we think about like Palestine organizing and the kinds of things that have happened coming out of these spaces where they're saying you're a lawyer, you can't say that because you're on out. I don't rock with
I
that.
don't
Yeah.
care.
I don't like that's you are not the highest moral authority
Yeah.
in my life.
Right.
Like my conscience is answers to something more profound than
Right.
that.
It's
Right.
bigger than this.
It's bigger than this.
Yeah.
And I think that like that doesn't mean I don't, I know how I move within a courtroom and what the
Mhm.
rules are, and I can do that. But that's not the end all be all of who I am. And I think I would challenge all of us
Yeah.
to find ways to like who are we beyond what's happening in this courtroom? What are our ethical duties to ourselves or to our communities, our history, the places that we come from?
Mm-hmm.
I think those things really matter. And I think that is like the lawyers that I feel most connected to are the ones who don't like, and I think you could take that sort of as like a badge, like, oh, I'm a lawyer, so I get to do this. Or you
Right.
can say like, I'm a lawyer, but that's the least important thing,
Right.
part of my identity.
Right.
And that's the thing that you kind of have to balance.
Those are good questions. And I feel like people who are challenged to answer these questions, if they do so at a certain point in their career, they can find out they can do this work a lot
Yes.
longer than
Yes.
Yeah.
they
Exactly.
wouldn't normally.
Yeah.
And I feel like our guard of lawyers
Mhm.
are uniquely situated because like
Mhm.
we're not, I'm gonna say we're not as radical, but we're not the Gen Z lawyers that we're
Sure.
supervising.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're not the lawyers who got their degrees in the 70s and the 80s.
Right, exactly.
But we work alongside both of them. And I
Exactly.
think we're getting a lot from both of those
Yes.
lawyers. Like
Mhm.
the lawyers who are in our office who've been doing this work for 20 plus years are brilliant.
Yeah.
Some of the smartest
Absolutely.
lawyers I've ever met
Yeah.
in my entire life.
Absolutely.
Now there are some of a disconnect that we think that's there
Yep.
that our new lawyers have.
Yep.
And like I think it puts us in a great situation.
absolutely.
But also puts a lot of power and authority on us to make
Yeah.
sure that we are guiding the younger generation of lawyers to have a little bit of the older attorneys
Yeah.
mindset
Yeah.
in them as well. Because they're so removed from them.
Yep.
And we're the only window
We're the
into
bridge.
we're the bridge.
Yeah.
And if we're not doing the work, then
Yeah.
that disconnect's gonna be there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's so
Yeah,
true.
no. And I love your point of like who are we outside of like what the New York bar tells us to be,
Mm-hmm.
because like I agree with you. I could give a shit about, what the bar says I should or should not say or should not do in a scenario. If something is like wrong, it's wrong.
Right.
And like
And it's not wrong because the New York State Bar
No,
Association told you
it's
it's wrong.
it's wrong because like it is harmful to human beings.
Right.
And like there's nothing that could ever make me be like, I can't say this
Yeah.
way because the New York bar says I can't.
No.
It's just like
Right.
like the Israel Palestine, like that
No.
issue. Like there's nothing that could tell me I can't say that Israel is genociding people.
Yep.
There's just nothing that could tell
No.
me I can't say it.
No.
You
Right.
know?
I think that we like get this like fiction when you like come up through like law school and you read all these like cases like Brown v. Board or like the Supreme, and then you have this like view of like, oh, like liberal lawyers are coming in and like we can save the world. And I think for me a big piece of disillusionment was when the travel ban had come down, with the Muslim travel ban, and like I had done a lot of organizing around that. I had put so much faith in the courts where I thought like, well, there's no way
Yeah.
that the Supreme Court is going to uphold this ban.
So we
And
used to
then it
think.
did.
That's what we used to think.
And it did. And now you see the Supreme Court just left and right, just like burning its legitimacy.
Right.
And so I think it's time for us to be able to look beyond the Supreme Court as like
Yes.
the marker of social progress.
Yes.
And even like thinking about public
Yeah.
defense history, I wanted to talk to you guys about like the Scottsboro Boys.
Yeah, let's get into
Let's get
it.
into it. Because I think that like there's been this we have this like very rich labor history in the US. And like in the early 1900s where there was like a big wave of communist organizing that we don't really like learn about or talk about, that's really been suppressed. But The Scottsboro Boys trial. So do you guys know about the trial? What happened?
Yes, yes.
So there was these 9 boys who
Mhm.
were accused of raping these 2 white women,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and they had basically a 1-day trial.
Mhm.
Their lawyers never spoke to them, completely incompetent, and they were sentenced to death. They were sentenced to be executed. It was a total sham
They
of
were
a
set up.
trial.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They were, and it was the sort of like small the state authorities were like, well, we're not going to lynch everyone. Look, you'll get a trial, right? Like that was the concession to
Right.
for the anti-lynching activists.
Yeah.
And that was where the original first the Supreme Court case, Powell v. Alabama.
Alabama, yeah.
Mhm.
It came that was a Scottsboro Boys case, and that was when the Supreme Court first said that you have a right to a competent lawyer. It's not just like you have a right to a lawyer,
Mhm.
but your lawyer has to know what they're doing.
Mhm.
And so they had gotten a new trial, and all that happened. The piece of history that I think we don't know that much about is that the lawyers who defended them and who brought this case were communist labor organizers.
Mm.
So in the 1930s, there was a massive wave of communist organizing in the South specifically. Robin D.G. Kelly is a communist historian who specifically writes about Black sharecroppers in the South during that time period,
Mhm.
who were being
I'm about to say
organized
it- I'm about to say
by
that right now.
by labor unions. So there's this great book. It's called Hammer and the Hoe,
Okay.
and I mean it talks about that history of the American Communist Party had come to a conclusion that the struggles of the working class and Black liberation were intimately
Intertwined.
tied together,
Right.
right? Like they were capitalism relied on exploiting Black people's labor.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so defeating capitalism required coming together and having that union.
Yeah.
And so the International Labor Defense was the legal wing of the Communist Party. And their cases at that time were mostly, they were defending anarchists, union organizers. I mean, union organizing in that time period was violent. It was bloody. People were killed. People were jailed regularly.
Yeah.
And so they had stepped in to represent these people who were fighting against their bosses and being jailed for it, essentially.
Yeah.
And one of those organizers came to the Scottsboro Boys trial, the first trial, the sham trial, and took up that cause. And so they got lawyers to represent them. They organized mass defense strategies around the country of bringing out protests, bringing people, and just making their cause well known around the country. And so, what happened to them, it happened all the time.
Mhm.
There's hundreds of cases
Right.
that we don't know about, people who
Mhm.
had these sham trials, who were executed,
Right.
and without even like a modicum of justice.
Right.
But the difference here was that they were communist labor organizers who came in and said, we're not going to let this happen.
Wow.
So that is part of our history as public defenders. And so that's why I think it's really beautiful to see the wave of labor organizing in public defense now, because I think we are finally reclaiming and reconnecting
Yeah.
to that history
Right.
instead of ignoring it.
Right. Wow. So I
Love
think
Yeah.
it's great. Great segue.
to what the topic is for
Yeah,
this
great
episode.
segue into labor work and,
Yeah.
and unionizing and the value of unionizing and
Yeah.
why people unionize and also the criticisms of it.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, what does it mean to be a part of a union and why do people think that's important?
Yeah, and I mean, look, let me first of all say I am not in our union.
Me too.
Which is,
I don't think
Me
that's
too.
by choice. so-
but not by choice. But the three of us were actually integral. I would say we were integral.
Yes.
We were
we
in
were.
organizing the union in our
I want to make
office.
sure I shout out Danny and Jeremy Benny.
Yeah, shout
Yeah.
out to Danny and Jeremy. Those folks really like they started it and got us
Right.
involved in it, and
Right.
our class really
Snowballed from there.
yeah, and it's not, so being in a union, the idea is that management of the people who manage the workplace, the people who control where the money goes, where the jobs go,
Mhm.
where the priorities go, have a tremendous amount of power. But the workers in an organization, if you come together, there's always more of us than there are of them.
Always.
And there's, the idea of this very central to leftist labor theory is that the workers are the ones that create value, all value.
Mhm.
When you go to, a Burger King, the person who's making your burger is
Mhm.
not the manager who owns the place and funds it,
Right.
but the actual labor is what's making the burger.
Right.
And every worker should have control over the conditions of their labor.
Right.
Like that's a very basic principle.
It's funny because it seems so common sense.
Yeah.
Seems common sense.
It
but,
seems common sense. And I think there's this idea that like the capitalist or the manager think that they know better, that they're smarter, that they have more, whatever, that they are able to better tell the worker,
Right.
this is what you need to do, this is what's right. And I think we reject that principle, and we say that the people who are actually doing the work should get to control how the work is done,
Right.
and should get to decide how much the work is compensated.
Right.
And that's very simple. And I think that our clients get that because our clients are in unions. Like our clients are in like all kinds of, whether it's construction, whether it's other types of, transit, like they know that bringing, even though individually they might not have that power, when they come together, they are able to collectively bargain instead of beg for the things that they want.
Right.
And some people think that as lawyers, we don't have to do that
Right.
because we're lawyers, we have law degrees, so we somehow don't need to have that kind of collective power. But I just don't think that's true. If you look at the people in public defender offices, if PD offices were just full of rich, wealthy people with connections, which
Right.
they used to be,
Right.
then fine.
Right.
You're not
Right.
relying on this job to make rent.
Right.
You have money from your parents or your whatever.
Right.
But if you want people to do this work who are coming from working class backgrounds, who have families to feed, whose families rely on them, you have to make the work sustainable.
Right.
And I think people forget that. People who've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, they think like, well, I did it and it was fine and it worked
Right.
out okay for me. But the people who are doing this work now are not the same as the ones who are doing it. And that's good. We want that to happen.
Yeah.
What have been your thoughts about that?
So what I'll say about our union, what's unique, outside of what other public defense officers do, is our union's wall to wall. Meaning, like, it's not just lawyers in our union,
Yes.
right? It's lawyers all the way down to non-lawyers, to the professional staff, admin, IT. And so, the way, like, I think about it as, like, us as lawyers, especially in a wall-to-wall union, we have a responsibility to fight for our non-lawyer comrades. And I think that gets lost on a lot of people. I think like we come in this space with a lot of different or a lot more of an understanding about like labor law and how labor law works. And like I think we like have the responsibility to utilize that knowledge to help out our non-lawyer comrades because their labor is just as important as our labor, right? Just because their labor looks different than our labor doesn't mean that, we shouldn't fight for them as hard as we fight for ourselves. Or doesn't mean that their labor is less value than our labor. And, I think that's what's great about our union is that like we really understand that and we fight for everybody in the union.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's been the thought about my union or our union in particular. But like in general, like I think unions are like the most important thing in our labor, in our system. Right. Especially now in a time in a world where like fascism is on the rise and, corporations and governmental figures really just want to strip, like they're doing everything they can right now to strip labor of its power and to strip people of their power.
Yeah.
If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be working so hard.
They wouldn't be working so hard to dismantle it.
Right.
And, I think unions are so vastly important in this moment because of the amount of power there is in collectively bargaining and coming together and like really showing the people that are in power, so to speak, that like we can shut this shit down.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to work. We could withhold our labor and what the fuck what are you guys gonna do about it? Like you guys can't do anything about it if we withhold our labor. And I think it has such an immense power to drive change. And like I think we just really need to lean into it. That's just my like minimal thoughts.
Sorry, what's your position?
Oh yes, I am. I am on the e-board of the union. Short plug.
Let's just disclose.
Let's just disclose I am on the e-board of the union. So yes,
what is your role? What
I am the Black Caucus rep. It's actually kind of weird because like as a Black Caucus rep, like I'm like I understand why I'm on the e-board, right? Because like
a Black person.
Yeah, because like we care about like I know like representation matters is like a very banal thing to say, but like we care about like actual representation, and so like we put a Black Caucus representative and a person of color representative and the LGBTQIA plus representative on the e-board of the union But like I say that to say like, what is it that I actually do? You know, like it's great though. Like I love being on the E board, but it's not. I'm not like VP of membership who like has to do like
You're
the
just like the
roles
chief
and
black
stuff.
person.
You know, it's funny because like in one of my speeches at a union thing, I was just like, "Hi, I'm Conrad, and I'm black."
I love
So
it.
funny. It was I'm gonna turn to Imani before I keep talking about it.
No, I'm thinking about whenever we first unionized, how my privilege growing up,
Mhm.
that was the first time I ever engaged with the thought process of unionizing. So like I was never averse to it. I just didn't really I knew nothing about labor work and labor law.
Yeah.
So I had to like really think. And before I went around advocating for it, I needed to make sure I believed in what union was. I just never engaged
Yeah.
with the thought process of it. And I think what convinced me or really like solidified me that unions were necessary was, our office had some pretty decent benefits. In terms of other public defender offices, there were some things that I was happy that our office provided. And then someone told me, like, Imani, that can be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like, wow. It's like, do we
Really can.
we don't have these protections to get these benefits that are so important for us.
Yeah.
And for someone who wants to do this work for a very long time, these benefits are important to me because if they're gone, I can't sustain myself in this work.
Exactly.
So when I realized, wow, without unions, that our management can just do whatever they want to do, that was my hooking point.
Yeah.
And now seeing how things have transpired, I'm just so happy that we have had the union because I can imagine the changes that would have happened in the past 6 years
Yep.
if we did not have these protections.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I can't say we because we're not part of the union. I can imagine what would have transpired if there was
But the
not a
union protects us too, right? Because even though we're not in the union, the contract that's negotiated, that even though we're not members of the union,
Right.
you guys are fighting for us.
Right. We
The
still
benefits
benefit
that
from.
you negotiate for are the ones that we benefit
Right.
from. So it's, even though we're not part of it, we are still reaping the benefits
Right.
of it.
If y'all establish some raises, we get the raises.
Right.
Exactly.
You're right.
if you establish some leave policy, we
Exactly.
benefit
You
from the
guys
leave
get to
policy
benefit
as
from the
well.
leave policy
Exactly.
too. Hey,
Right.
I think that is just like it's, I think this is happening all over the nonprofit world where it used to be the history of nonprofit world and social work came from like, this used to be like rich white ladies' side hustle. Like their husbands were like making, and they were like, they don't work. They were like part of the leisure class.
Yeah.
And so this would be sort of their like philanthropy, like, oh, like let's get together and have lunch and raise some money from whatever, right?
Right.
And so the idea of treating it as a real workplace that needs benefits and protections and all of that was never really part of the history of it because historically it was not meant for people like us.
Mhm.
Like we weren't doing these kinds of jobs,
Mhm.
right? So like now as that has shifted, there has been a real slowness in having that catch up.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're starting to see now is that's why there's been so much. It's not just in law offices,
Mhm.
it's all over. Like you look at all offices across the city and all different kinds of nonprofit jobs.
Yeah.
They're unionizing
Yeah.
because they're realizing that you can't just rely on the fact that, oh, my boss is really nice and we get along really well.
Right.
Well, your boss might change.
Mm-hmm.
Or the board might come in and say, we don't want you talking about Palestine. And then the board is going to respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like we are only as protected as the structures that are in place
Yeah.
by the union. And if what a union does is it protects it and makes it stronger so that just because someone's personality changes or you get a new person in the job,
Mhm.
your right to do what you do and the things that your livelihood relies on
Mhm.
won't change.
I do want to throw an element into this conversation, and it's I guess more so for us to respond to a critique of unionizing. So you mentioned earlier like the power of workers and the power of a union, and if we decided not to work, the whole thing was shut down. But being public defenders, that will have real implications on the people that we represent and the communities that we represent. And I hear people would say things like, there are some jobs that shouldn't unionize like such as doctors and lawyers, where our job is to serve the people and our jobs are to affect people's liberty and whether they stay alive or not when it comes to doctors and nurses. And when people unionize, it focuses on the employed, those of us who are employed, and not the people that we're actually trying to serve. I have a friend of mine who you might be heard of me talk about him before, but he's a very, very, very right libertarian, and he's anti-unions.
Mm.
I know it's hard to say he's a friend, but he is. I love him dearly. Um, his argument is that unions center the workers to the detriment of the people that they're trying to serve sometimes. His biggest beef was with the teachers unions. He's like, teachers unions, all they care about is themselves. They don't care about the students, and the focus of the unions ends up deteriorating the education of the students in some capacity. Um, and I've heard that argument made towards public defenders. You know, we focus on ourselves, and then what happens is we lose focus on our clients, and then our clients are the ones that are impacted. If we decide not to work, if we who our clients are affected. If nurses decide not to work, if doctors decide not to work, people could die. What is our responsibility, and how do we respond to that critique?
Um, so, you know, I want to make 2 points or separate two things.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, unions are run by people and people are fallible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, unions can be captured by, people with ideologies and with goals that are somewhat that could end up being anti-union and anti-people.
Mm-hmm.
And like you see that in a lot of like teachers unions and nurses unions.
Mm-hmm.
Police aren't labor, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, please do. None of this applies to the police, by
does
the
not
way.
apply to the
No.
police. But you can see that capture in those other types of unions. So yes, it is true that like fallible people could be in power in a union and take a union in a direction that it shouldn't be going. But I think no, like the simple fact that we're public defenders doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a union. The simple fact that we represent clients doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a union.
Mm-hmm.
Every job in America affects people.
Mm-hmm.
Like people who make cars, separate car parts, put them together, they have a union. They serve people because the end product of their labor is a car that people use to drive to and from work.
Mm-hmm.
Buses, transportation, like they affect people, right? Because their labor affects people getting to and from work or to and from essential services.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see our job as any different, right? Like we provide a service that, ultimately could affect someone's life, just like those other laborers do. Their
EMT
labor,
workers,
EMT
ambulance,
workers,
firefighters.
and so like I say that to say like what we do like as laborers in a union in fighting for our own rights is actually helping our clients.
Mm.
Because like if you have a lawyer who's burnt out, if you have a lawyer who can't afford their rent, if you have a lawyer who can't afford childcare or doesn't have enough time to take care of their child, and so is mentally dealing with the effects of not being able to take care of their child,
Mm-hmm.
then you don't have a lawyer who could fully be there and be present for you because their mind is somewhere else or they don't have enough energy to deal with your case today.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it is important for your lawyer to have a union. It is important for your lawyer to be able to fight for their rights and fight um, to have a life that is meaningful to them so that they can then come back and be able to fight for you in a meaningful way. And so like for people who say that, lawyers shouldn't have unions, I don't understand where they're coming from with that kind of a mindset.
Yeah.
I think I co-sign everything that Conrad just said. I think another piece of it that you can't leave out is if you think about if you extend that logic to its its conclusion, right? How far does that go?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if there is no world, and if you say that the conditions under which public defense can happen requires people to suffer, requires people to give up livelihoods, requires people to forego having, taking care of their families, then we're not in a world where public defense can exist. Right? Like
That's
then you are describing a fantasy. If your fantasy world of public defense requires people to suffer, then that's not a sustainable vision. And I don't think anyone would say I don't think any of our clients would say yes, the price of my representation in court must be that this lawyer has a salary that won't let them pay rent.
Right.
Like that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And what that does, that kind of framing, it individualizes a systemic failure.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying that you, Conrad, are responsible for the fact that your client had to miss work and stay late because you had 10 cases on and you couldn't see him until the afternoon. That's your fault.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
the people whose fault it is are the ones who have created the conditions for that to be your labor. And I think being in a union is about taking the power back to recreate those conditions. A union is just a democracy.
That's literally what it is. It's
Fucked
just a
up shit happens in
democracy.
democracies, right? Like, as we know. But I think the union just creates the structure under which change can happen.
Yeah.
Without that structure, without the structure of democracy, there is no way for the change to actually happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We gotta have you back here many more times.
Well, this was a delight. I love talking with you guys. This is always a super fun time.
Wow. I wish we had more time.
What we need to do is get some
Yeah,
of our
we do, man,
opponents
'cause
in
this could
here
go
and
far.
just-
This could go far, man.
I want our haters in here.
This could go far.
That would be I think that could be a good conversation if it was moderated. But yeah, Urooj, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
Thank
guys for
you,
doing this. This is
Urooj.
amazing.
I want to honor our time because
Yes.
I would continue to go if it was up to me.
Well, luckily we all work together. So
Yeah.
one day.
Yes, for sure.
Continue this on the couch in our office.
Well, one thing that we often say here on the podcast is, we don't offer legal advice. We just offer free game. And we ask every one of our guests to leave. You just dropped a whole hour of knowledge and game. But if you could leave people who tune into this episode with one thing to take away or just one piece of game, what would you want to tell them?
I would say that if you are grounded in yourself, if you're in right relationship with your own set of values, no one can tell you anything. So that's what I would say, is to get right with yourself, and then the rest of the world will follow.
That's good.
Put that on a fucking bumper sticker.
Conrad, you got anything you wanna leave the people with after this episode?
I'm just gonna say, man, again, as I said in the beginning, me and Urooj just have a very similar mindset and the way we approach things.
Yeah.
And so I just echo the bumper sticker that
Here,
Urooj
what I
just
will
put on
add,
the
what I
car.
think that's something I say and what I work towards. I see you guys live that, both of you.
Thank
Both
you.
of you
I
fucking
see you
live
live it
that.
too.
I do, but I'm scared and anxious on the inside. But I see you guys you guys, that is what I admire the most about both of you, is that you have such a strong sense of moral clarity and you don't let anyone fuck with that. And I respect that. I admire it. It's what I'm always aiming towards.
Thank you.
So it is
Thank
a
you,
pleasure to know
Urooj.
you and to work with both of you.
I'll leave
Urooj.
this with people are power.
That's right.
People are
That's right.
power. Labor is power. There is power in us collecting and working together to transform the world. I'll leave it with that.
Wow. And what I would say is I will piggyback off of Urooj to, do the work to be at right relationship with yourself, and then surround yourself with people who are also in that same
Yes.
space. Like Urooj, like a Conrad, and it just makes going
Like
through life.
Imani.
Like Imani.
Thank you. Not only does it make life easier to go through together, but if you happen to share work with them and you happen to share a work that's as stressful as our work, it just makes it so much more durable and so much more worthwhile. All right.
All right. Wow, this
We-
was
It's too
great.
bad we have to end.
We have come to the end of an episode of Brothers in Law podcast. Please tune in to the future episodes. Urooj, thanks for coming once
Of course,
again.
this was
We love you.
Yes.
Love you guys
And
too.
we gotta have you back again.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm game whenever
Yes.
you all want me.
Yes,
here.
and I'm digging the pants. Can't
Yes.
dripped out.
Okay, it's like June. It's Pride.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we out, y'all,
All right.
in the podcast.
All right.